through our country has come full circle today. Ke kahi e ke kahi. It is time we have aloha for all. Mahalo, Madam President.
Members, I'd like to remind you that we are on the motion for agree, disagree. So remarks for this motion, and then we will take up the final motion. Any further discussion? If not, members, please note that the Senate received Senate Bill 1, House Draft 1 on Friday, November 8 at 10:16 p.m. Therefore, if there are no objections, we'll proceed with final reading on Senate Bill 1, House Draft 1. Except we need to vote on the motion. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Motion is carried. Now we will proceed with taking the final reading on consent. Madam Clerk.
Final reading of Senate Bill 1, House Draft 1, relating to equal rights.
Senator He.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in support of Senate Bill 1, House Draft 1, relating to equal rights.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Before my formal remarks on this recommendation, I wish to thank the staff of the Senate, and in particular, the staffs of Senate Clerk Carol Taniguchi, the Sergeant-at-Arms, Ben Villaflor and his staff, the Sheriff's Department under the leadership of Darryl Na'auau, my staff, including Andrea Pakele, Diamond Grace, and Walden Au, and finally, the many volunteers who assisted us by pulling the plow of special session called by the Governor of Hawaii, the Aloha State, to broaden its meaning of just that word, aloha. I wish to thank the members of the legislature for bringing us to this moment. And most of all, I wish to thank the people for their participation in government and the civics lessons I will keep with me forever. The actions of this process and the citizen behavior, good and bad, are a constant reminder of the dynamics of democracy. So let me begin. The words above the entrance to the building where the United States Supreme Court meets are, quote, equal justice under law, end quote. These 4 words reminds me that the sole purpose of the United States Supreme Court is to uphold the United States Constitution, that sacred document that unites and ties us together purposefully as citizens of one nation, each of whom are guaranteed the equal justice of the law. And therein is why we are here on this important occasion. There was a time when gays were forbidden from working for the federal government, unless, of course, no one knew you were gay. There was a time when if you owned a company, you could only do business with the federal government on the condition that none of your employees were gay. And up until a mere 5 months ago, a gay married couple were not eligible for as many as 1,138 federal benefits that were permitted by law to opposite-sex married couples. Today, that law is different. And that is because in June of this year, the United States Supreme Court found Section 3 of the Defense of Marriage Act to be unconstitutional. As a result, same-sex married couples are now entitled to the same benefits as opposite-sex married couples. Equal justice under law. Those benefits include Social Security, military spousal benefits, family medical leave benefits, federal tax benefits, temporary assistance for needy families or TANF benefits, Medicaid and Medicare benefits, private employment benefits, free application for federal student aid or FAFSA benefits, bankruptcy benefits, supplemental security income benefits, federal employee benefits, and veteran spousal benefits. In short, the U.S. Supreme Court concluded that the existence of an unequal two-tiered system of marriage existed, resulting in the discrimination against gay people solely because they are gay, in direct contravention of the United States Constitution. And so it would be that Edith Windsor, the surviving spouse of Thea Spire, would successfully challenge the United States government in 2009 that we are here today to enact legislation principled around the values of citizenship, equality, justice, and courage. Edie Windsor, the widow whose same-sex spouse died in 2009, 2 years after they were married, challenged the constitutionality of Section 3 of the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA. Some of you may recall that the United States Congress enacted this provision 3 years after our court, the Hawaii Supreme Court's decision in Bear v. Lewin 20 years ago in 1993, but also before, quote, before any state had acted to permit it, end quote. The it being the legalization of same-sex marriages. Section 3 of DOMA's primary purpose and effect was to preclude lawfully married same-sex couples from being recognized as such by the federal government. As a result, Edie Windsor was denied the exact same benefits accrued to opposite-sex married couples in her situation. Ms. Windsor and her spouse were married in 2007 in Canada after spending 40 years together. Their marriage was recognized as valid by the laws of the state of New York, the state of their residence. Parenthetically, let me add here that they were married 40 years after being together because Thea Spencer had multiple sclerosis. She asked Miss Windsor, "Would you still marry me?" And that is why they were married. After the death of her spouse, 2 short years later, Ms. Windsor inherited all of her wife's property, but was ineligible for the marital tax exemption from the federal estate tax. Accordingly, she was required to pay $363,000 in federal taxes, a liability that she paid but ultimately challenged in the federal district court on the firm belief that Section 3 of DOMA violated the equal protection guarantee that is binding on the federal government under the 5th Amendment of the United States Constitution. The U.S. District Court agreed, finding Section 3 unconstitutional, and the Second Circuit upheld the ruling on appeal. And as I indicated earlier, in June of this year, the United States Supreme Court held that Section 3, as applied to same-sex couples in lawful marriages under state law, impermissibly violated basic due process and equal protection principles applicable to the federal government through the 5th Amendment. In writing for the majority, Justice Anthony Kennedy, nominated to the United States Supreme Court by President Ronald Reagan in 1988, said there were 4 fundamental points. First, he noted that the nation's long history of treating the, quote, definition and regulation of marriage, end quote, as, quote, within the authority and realm of the separate states, end quote. And that is where our Hawaii State Constitution is so important because it gives broad discretion to allow for same-sex marriage. Second, in the exercise of its, quote, sovereign authority, end quote, New York State granted same-sex couples the right to marry as a, quote, powerful means of enhancing the recognition, dignity, and protection of the class in their own community, end quote. Third, Section 3 of DOMA's, quote, avowed purpose and practical effect was to impose a disadvantage, a separate status, and so a stigma upon all who enter into same-sex marriages made lawful by the unquestioned authority of each state, end quote. In essence, by depriving only same-sex married couples of federal benefits and responsibilities, the law deliberately created an inequality between different classes of state-sanctioned marriages. And finally, fourth, as a law with the purpose and effect of singling out a disfavored class of people to bear an injury, Section 3 violated both the broad guarantee of personal liberty under the Fifth Amendment and its more specific guarantee of equal protection. Madam President and fellow senators, we have witnessed during the past 2 weeks many communications asserting that this proposed legislation has been rushed during this session. Some have suggested that this is a done deal, insinuating that the existence of colluding between us is going on. House Speaker Suki, you, Madam President, and I were first elected in 1982. Only Speaker Emeritus Say, Senator Taniguchi, and Senator Solomon predate us in that regard. Many of us here have been members of the legislature for well over a decade. As such, most legislators today know that this special session has been anything but rushed. Madam President, you and I know that in 2013, the Senate Committee on Judiciary and Labor, which I serve as your chair, was referred 850 bills. Your committee was given 5 weeks to reduce that number to whatever was possible under our rules. In 2013, that number became just under 300 measures that survived due to time. Each member of this chamber knows intimately that this measure, with all of its emotion, would not have been given the hours of focused attention had this been proposed in the 2014 regular session. Anyone who disagrees is uninformed or simply disagreeable. Governor Abercrombie first posted the legislative proposal on marriage equity on August 22nd, 2013. The proposal has been modified and transformed into Senate Bill 1 relating to equal rights. While the title has changed from its original posting, the reason is self-evident, and I will get into that a bit later. Your Committee on Judiciary and Labor first heard the bill on October 28th, a full 10 weeks from its first posting by Governor Abercrombie. Moreover, at your suggestion, Madam President, the committee posted Senate Bill 1 on October 22, when by our own rules, that legislation could have been posted later. The truth of the matter is that the discussion on same-sex marriage really began 20 years ago in 1993 with the decision of the Hawaii Supreme Court in the lawsuit brought against the state by a same-sex couple denied a marriage license. Therefore, it has been 10 weeks since the posting of the bill by the governor to the first hearing by your committee, and 20 years since the first discussion on same-sex marriage was brought up in 1993. Either way, to say this legislation is rushed is simply untrue. The second matter of collusion is absolute garbage. Unless someone wishes to name names, facts, dates, locations, or any information, this scurrilous remark does not deserve a response. What is accurate is that the legislature heard 2 full weeks of passionate testimonies and communications from many people who took the time from their busy schedules to have this discussion on same-sex marriage. Many of the people are Christians who firmly believe that Senate Bill 1 is an abomination according to their God. And we have received communication from other Christians and clergy who, just as passionate, believe that their Christian God supports this legislation. So whose Christian God is correct? Which people are we to believe, and on what basis? All of us have received communications from others beyond the Christian belief that have also contributed to this discussion. Members of Congress, Tulsi Gabbard is a Hindu. Colleen Hanabusa, a Buddhist. Senator Brian Schatz, a Jew. And Senator Mazie Hirono, a Buddhist. All 4 non-Christians support Senate Bill 1. Former U.S. Senators, the late Daniel K. Inouye, a Methodist, and Kaniela Akaka of Kauai Ha'o Church also are on record as supporting same-sex marriage. So what is it then that every one of us, the Christians who oppose Senate Bill 1, the Christians who support this legislation, our congressional delegation, each of whom are not of the Christian faith, and former U.S. senators have in common? It is the United States Constitution, that governing document rooted firmly in the beliefs of fairness and impartiality that binds us all as Americans, regardless of our passionate convictions, one way or the other. The U.S. Constitution frames our system of government. It is the foundation of our republic. It is the underpinning of our democracy. And it is who Americans turn to for justice, fairness, and equality. The U.S. and Hawaii Constitutions is the reason why I will support Senate Bill 1, House Draft 1. Both governing documents of Hawaii and the United States reminds me that in the midst of confusion, in the presence of misunderstanding and misperceptions, in the manifestation of zealous and obsessive disagreement, the Constitution is where clarity and purpose reside. The U.S. Constitution directs and provides all Americans with logic, reason, judgment, and a rational sensibility firmly rooted in equality, fairness, dignity, respect, and devotion. Finally, but not last, the U.S. Constitution and Hawaii Constitution represents those 4 words above the entrance to the United States Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. Equal justice under law. I would close with 2 emails I have received a few days ago. Both are from women deeply concerned about this issue, and both of whom I have never met. The first is from L. Mattiucci. She says, I am not gay. Many would call me a staunch Republican. Let gay people get married. They are born gay. And if they are born that way, then God made them that way. If God made them that way, then they should have the same exact equal rights as a person born black, white, brown, yellow, male, or female. We elect our representatives to enact legislation that is fair and wise. Sometimes that is not what the majority may seem fit to accept at this time. If we simply always did, quote, majority rules, end quote, type of voting, we could well still have slaves, or women may not be able to vote today. The second is a letter I received, none other than from Edie Windsor herself. She says, Dear Senator He, my name is Edie Windsor. I am the New York City lesbian widow who happened to sue the United States of America because of DOMA. Fortunately, we won, and now the marriages of gay Americans throughout this country have the right to equal respect under federal law. But because it is the states, not the federal government, who marry people, the first step for most gay couples is to have the ability to get married in states in which they live. I understand that you've been leading the charge to bring marriage equality to Hawaii. That's not true, but I appreciate her comment. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your efforts. I've heard that there's a debate about the scope of religious exemptions in the law, and that you believe that religious institutions should have to play by the same rules as everyone else. While I agree with your position, I'm writing to ask you to do whatever it takes to get the bill passed, no matter what, even a law with religious exemptions. If no equal marriage law passes in Hawaii, it will surely be a loss for Hawaii. But it will also be a loss for the rest of the country, since we need to keep building momentum toward full equality, state by state by state. So please do whatever you can to make sure some bill passes in Hawaii, even if an imperfect one, so that gay couples in Hawaii can have the same rights that I have in New York, and so that Hawaii becomes the next state to join the marriage equality. With greatest respect, Edith Windsor. Members of the Senate, some have said this is the wrong time to bring this matter up. Martin Luther King Jr. said, quote, there is no wrong time to seek justice, end quote. So join with me and bend the arc of moral justice by conferring on all Americans equal treatment under the law. Let us confirm that all marriages are equal, regardless that they may be straight or gay, as the United States and Hawaii constitutions provide. Thank you, Madam President.
Further discussion. Senator Gabbard.
Madam President, I rise in strong opposition to SB1.
Please proceed.
Colleagues, first, I would like to sincerely apologize if my remarks offend you in any way. Frankly, I'm disappointed and dismayed that a contentious issue of this magnitude was crammed into an extremely short special session. As you know, we had about a 12-hour hearing in the Senate and a 56-hour hearing over 5 days in the House. And when you tally up more than 26,000 pieces of testimony in both chambers, over 60% were opposed. Now, with these kind of numbers, the longest hearings, the most testimony ever received on an issue ever in Hawaii's history, one would think that we as elected officials would slow down, pause, realizing how important this issue is to the people, and take more time to deliberate in order to make an informed decision. I mean, that's our job, right? That's what we're supposed to do, gather all the facts, make an informed decision that represents the people who hired us, our constituents. But the unfortunate fact is the legislature has ignored the majority and instead chose to rush this incredibly divisive bill through a special session. And the question I would have you ask yourselves is, why the big rush? Let me go back and give you a little history in case you've forgotten. It was in 1990 that three same-sex couples applied for marriage licenses. In 1993, the Hawaii Supreme Court ruled in favor of those same-sex couples. In 94, the legislature passed a law defining marriage as between a man and a woman. In 1996, Judge Kevin Chang ruled that that law was unconstitutional. In 97, the legislature passed a constitutional amendment, unanimous in the Senate. The vote was 44-6 in the House. And then for about the next 18 months, there were town hall meetings, media campaigns by both sides, church meetings, talk on the golf course, at the farmer's market. Everyone had time to talk story. In 1998, then we, the voters, we voted in November with about 70% majority ratifying the constitutional amendment. So for 8 years, 1990 to 1998, we had an ongoing conversation about this obviously important issue that culminated in a constitutional amendment that left the decision on the definition of marriage up to the legislature, not the courts. Now let's fast forward to 2013. I am not saying that we should take 8 years to decide the definition of marriage in Hawaii. What I am saying is that we should at the very least not pass this measure today. Compare what happened in the 90s to what we just went through. First, unbeknownst to many in the public, is that the Judiciary and Labor Chair and I actually co-sponsored a Senate concurrent resolution, SCR 166, last session that passed in both chambers calling for a task force headed by the Dean of the UH Law School to study the economic, social, and religious impacts of legalizing same-sex marriage in Hawaii, with a deadline of reporting back to the legislature by November 1st. So the question is, what happened? What were the findings of the task force? Surely with an issue of this magnitude, an issue that was hotly debated in our state for 8 years, surely this would be important information to help us in our deliberations. The answer? The task force never met because the governor called a special session. Now, regardless of whether you're for or against same-sex marriage, the very least we could have done is to have taken the time to really study the potential impacts of legalizing same-sex marriage in Hawaii. Secondly, the legislature did not want a special session. As you well know, we needed 2/3 of the Senate and the House, and the votes weren't there in the House to call a special session. So our decision as a body was no special session. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the governor decreed there will be a special session. So we have two legislative decisions that we, the legislature, made, the task force and no special session, that are overridden by the governor. That's not democracy by any stretch of the imagination. That's not Pono by any stretch of the imagination. That's one of the main reasons why the traditional marriage supporters are so outraged by what's been going on for the last 2 weeks. That's why thousands, not hundreds as the Star Advertiser reported, that's why thousands showed up at the rally on opening day of the session. And that's why so many people gave up their precious family time and slogged down to the Capitol every day for the House hearing. We are dealing with the sacred institution of marriage that's been around for thousands of years, and we, the elected officials, their representatives, are saying, yes, let's have a 5-day special session and redefine marriage. This is crazy. There was no pressing reason why the governor needed to call us back into special session. The fact is, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that it's up to the states to continue deciding this issue. And contrary to what's been said about same-sex marriage being a civil right, the fact is no court has ruled ever that marriage is a civil right. Another reason not to rush this bill through, why we need more time to deliberate and debate is, we've been hearing over and over again from the LGBT community and other proponents of SB1 that all they want is marriage equity or marriage equality. Now, maybe I missed it in all the testimony that was submitted, but I don't think we heard from the B in LGBT, the bisexual community. For example, if Jack, Frank, and Mary are in a loving relationship and we're all for marriage equality, then why aren't the three of them covered in SB1? Why can't they get married? If this is all about fairness, equity, and love, shouldn't there be a friendly amendment introduced today to include them? That's my point. In their haste to rush this bill through, the advocates seem to have forgotten about their bisexual brothers and sisters. Or will there be a challenge and lawsuit by bisexuals if SB1 passes into law with the claim that they are being discriminated against? These and other legitimate concerns, such as how this will impact religious freedoms and the education of our keiki, have not been resolved. Colleagues, in closing, I know the conventional wisdom said that this is a done deal. That I heard on the news last night and today that the vote is going to be 21-4 if every one of us are here. And it looks like there are 2 absent, so maybe it's going to be 19-4 today. And that the governor will be signing SB1 into law later today. But I'm asking you one more time, let's wait until regular session. Let's go out to the neighbor islands and give folks who could not come over for the special session the opportunity to share their mana'o. Let's take more time to sift through those 26,000 testimonies. Yes, much of it is repetitive. Some of it is downright off the wall. But who knows? Maybe buried in there somewhere is a thought, an idea that will lead us to what I call the aloha solution. I'm convinced that it's there. Let's take the time to find it so we can heal the divisiveness this issue has caused in our island paradise, so that we can indeed live aloha. Yes, the vote may turn out the same, but it's worth the effort. Your constituents who don't agree with your yes vote will at least feel that you respected them, that you heard them out. Let's really consider the voice of the people and vote in the best interest of our state. Please join me in voting no on this measure, and let's revisit this when session starts in January. Yes, waiting is the fairest thing to do. Otherwise, this rancor, this discord, this divisiveness will linger and fester in our beloved Hawai'i. Mahalo and ke akua me ke aloha.
Further discussion, Member Senator Tukuda.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to speak in support of SB1 HD1.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Much has been said on the issue in our chamber and in the House over the past 2 weeks, over the past 2 decades, really. So I found myself looking at pictures for inspiration on what to say today. While I was scrolling through the pictures taken by the Star Advertiser, one of them really drove it home for me as to why we are here. It was a picture of Amina Peterson, a young African-American woman from Kaneohe, wearing a bright red shirt with an equal sign, carrying a large homemade poster board in front of our state capitol. It wasn't her bright red shirt or the fact that she was from Kaneohe that made me pause on her picture. It was her sign. Remember, the majority voted to keep me a slave. Colleagues, we are, as our Judiciary and Labor Chair has stated, at a defining moment in our history. With the benefit of hindsight only history can afford us, we know that we are indeed at a crossroads, positioned in that proverbial time that John F. Kennedy referenced in his book, Profiles in Courage, as the lag between our way of thought and our way of life. At so many of these points in our past, It was not the majority or popular vote that righted the wrongs and corrected the injustices. It was leaders who did not merely listen to whose cries were the loudest or petitions the longest. Judges and lawmakers who, with their pens and collective votes, were asked to exhibit great courage on behalf of the disenfranchised and minority voice. How we think today does not always match up with the way we want to live tomorrow, reflect the kind of society we want to be. Think about the fact that the popular majority once supported segregation in our schools. In 1942, public opinion polls showed an overwhelming majority. 2/3 polled supported segregated schools. It wasn't until 1963 that a majority of Americans supported desegregation. And you'd have to wait until 1970 for public opinion to flip completely to the point where now an overwhelming majority, or 2/3 polled, now supported same schools for all of our children. And when Mildred Jeter and Richard Loving were breaking Virginia's miscegenation laws, the popular majority universally disapproved of interracial marriage. In 1959, only 4% polled approved of marriages between white and colored people. That was the term used then. While we are now at 87% in 2013 approving of marriages between whites and non-whites, which is now the term used, the more telling statistic is that the majority of Americans polled did not approve of such marriages until the late 1990s. So often during these proceedings, we have heard the phrase, "Let the people vote. Let the people decide." Well, yesterday, I was at the Veterans Day ceremony at the Hawaii State Veterans Cemetery, and Drusilla Tanaka came up to me and gave me a copy of the 3rd volume of Japanese Eyes, American Heart, Learning to Live in Hawaii. And like most things, it got me thinking. Over 70 years ago, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, public opinion polls were taken, as they often were. And while there were no doubt many motivations, there was widespread support for a number of actions, some of the most civil, believe it or not, being the internment of Japanese citizens. This is a case where public opinion did sway public policy makers, where you could say that the people did decide. And while there are some, even today, who will say it was the right decision and for the best, I don't know that my great-grandfather, who was flown from Hawaii to Santa Fe, New Mexico to be interned, while his son went off to boot camp to serve our country, or the over 120,000 others like him who were interned during the war, would agree. And yes, the way we think and the way we want to live did finally meet up in 1988 with the passage of the Civil Liberties Act, but that was over 40 years later. Looking back at some of these critical junctures in our past, we see that public opinion was often at odds with the granting or protection of the rights of others. This does not mean we should stand idly by and wait for our collective conscience to catch up. This does not mean that in moving forward, we are negating the rights or disrespecting the views of the voting majority. I would contend that we are simply serving the role history has afforded us, serving as the bridge between the somewhat divided public sentiment of today and where we aspire to be as a society and a people tomorrow. And so I look forward to that day, and I hope it isn't in the too distant future, when the way we think meets up with the way we want to live, like it did with our views on slavery, school segregation, and interracial marriage. Perhaps it will be our children, our grandchildren, maybe even our great-grandchildren, that will sit down by our side to listen to us tell them stories of this day. And I know I will smile and sit back as they say, "What took you so long?" Thank you.
Further discussion, members. Senator Kidani.
Thank you, Madam President. I stand in support of this measure.
Please proceed.
I'd like to read an editorial from this morning's Star Advertiser by Richard Barreca. When the 55 hours of testimony ended, when more than 1,000 people had spoken, when Hawaii's legislature was acting to make gay marriage legal, the most powerful words were spoken by 13-year-old Schuyler Young. The question of whether two people of the same gender can be a family with all that entails was answered in Schuyler's testimony about her two mothers. Quote, President Abraham Lincoln believed that all men and women shall be treated equally. It is like how the black slaves fought for their rights, and now we, the gay families, are fighting for our rights, she wrote. The Bible says that God created every man, woman, and child perfect. So that means that gay people were created perfect too. Schuyler is the daughter of Tambry and Suzanne Young, who have been a couple for 30 years. She is a remarkably poised young teen. In an interview during the House debate on gay marriage, Schuyler talked about going with her parents as they attended meetings advocating for same-sex marriage. When I was little, I would not pay attention, play, and fall asleep under the table. As I grew older, I realized this is a really big problem for my moms, she said. I realized I need to be more involved. I am so shy, but I think I need to break out of my shell and show the world what my family is all about. In her testimony, Schuyler stated, "What's the big deal? There's no reason how having two people of the same sex love each other should be such a big deal. It's rude, it's crazy, and it's just not necessary for those who oppose same-sex marriage to fear it. It's none of their business how our family lives, but it is the government's business to ensure our family is treated the same as all other families and provided equal rights under the law as required by the U.S. Constitution," she said in her testimony. To the demand repeatedly brought up during the testimony that a child must have a mother and a father, Schuyler answered, "I hear people say you need a mom and dad. My friend Will had a dad, and he lost his dad. So what about people like him? Are you saying they are going to be messed up even though they are part of a straight couple?" Tambry Young, mother of Schuyler, in her own legislative testimony, recalled precisely what it is like being a family. After we were married in Massachusetts, we purchased an item at a Boston mall, and Schuyler questioned Suzanne about why she was not signing her name as Suzanne Young because we got married yesterday and we are all Youngs now. This is when we realized that being married meant more than just being granted rights. It was to Schuyler a symbol of what made us a family, Tambry Young said. With her concluding testimony, Schuyler explained the gay marriage struggle and its inevitable triumph. Going to hell after you die is not based on what sex you love. It is based on if you were bad in your life. I find it mean and cruel that people think we will go to hell based on who we love. They just don't understand us. My family is in a fire. Some flames may give up when the rain comes to put it out, but the true heat in the coals will never die. Colleagues, if God in His wisdom created our gay brothers and sisters, why would He deny them love? God is love. Love is God. Mahalo and maluhia to Schuyler Young. Mahalo and maluhia to all. Aloha.
Thank you. Further discussion, Senator Green.
Thank you, Madam President. Support. Colleagues, our greatest responsibility as a legislature is to protect the civil rights of everyone in Hawaii, including both the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the right of freedom of religion and freedom of worship. We worked very hard during this process to ensure that everyone's rights were protected in this legislation, and specifically, that the freedom of religion is respected and upheld as a cherished value in our society. It's for these reasons that the bill should become law today. Thank you, members.
Further discussion? If not, Senator Galatario.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in support.
Please proceed.
Mahalo, Madam President. Colleagues, I mentioned, as a previous speaker mentioned, the arc of justice the last time I spoke on this bill. Dr. Martin Luther King has been quoted once before in a previous speech that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Madam President, I would submit to you that it does not bend on its own. The arc of justice bends because we put our hands on that arc and we bend it ourselves towards justice. And now on marriage equality, colleagues, we will be seeking to take our conscience vote one step further, because we're part of a nation that has for so many years built a reputation for being tolerant, for being inclusive, and above all, fair. And this is about fairness for all. And much of, like the big social reforms that have happened before it. And as the Constitution was quoted earlier, the preamble states, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity." And that means, colleagues, not to just half of ourselves, or 75% of ourselves, or even 99% of ourselves. It means the whole people. There are times that history and fate meet at a single time in a single place to shape a turning point, and this is one of those points. And Madam President, I would submit to a previous speaker, the good gentleman from Kapolei, that we need more time. As a fellow composer, when is your song finished? When is that last stroke finish your portrait? When is the last word in your novel finished? When do you come to that decision? We have to end a song. We have to end a painting. We need to end a novel. And that's what we're doing here today. We're finishing our history on this matter. In our time, we rarely come to moments of great decisions like this. Yes, of course, we've had great debates on great issues, but rarely in any time does an issue lay bare the secret heart of Hawaii itself. And that's what it's shown, a lot of Hawaii's heart. Which was most interesting, Madam President, to watch and feel these past several days. Rarely are we met with a challenge of this nature, not on our biological growth that's been suggested, or our economic growth, or maybe our scientific growth, certainly as issued in testimony and demonstration, our spiritual growth. Well, I think rather we challenge the values and the purposes and the meaning of our beloved Hawaii. That's what we're doing right here, right now, today. The issue of equal rights for the LGBTXYZ community, whatever that may be, is such an issue. And should we win on every other issue and be unfair on this issue, then we've lost. The great phrase of this nation, all men are created equal, and women, kalamai. Those are not just clever words or an empty theory. Those are words that are promised to every citizen. Now, I would say that issues of rights are complex. But about this, there can be and should be no argument. Every citizen must be treated equally. Now, we've heard all the voices. We certainly have. You have not gone unheard. Voices in support, voices in opposition, voices of joy, voices in anger. And let me say this to the voices that have issued threats of ouster. Madam President, I say it to you, do what you must. But each one of these elected officials in both bodies, I will tell you, no matter how they voted and no matter how they intend to vote today, rather, have a much larger body of work to stand on. For most, As the good Judiciary Chair would say, this is not our first rodeo. We're certainly not one-trick ponies. When we enter into these hallowed halls of our state capital, we do so with the knowledge that we must represent our communities and constituencies on every issue. Therefore, when the curtain goes down on this, my opponent on this issue may be my ally on the next issue. And the beat goes on. This time, on this issue, though, colleagues, there must be no delay or no hesitation or no compromise with our purpose. So where do we go from here, Madam President? As you know, I was trying to figure out how we're going to wrap this thing up, right? So, as you know, I've done radio work before. As a matter of fact, Madam President, so have you, so have other colleagues in this body. I hosted late night radio, afternoon radio, morning radio, with some great and talented partners, I might add. Well, you establish a trust with your listeners, you know? What you do is they let you into their most private and intimate settings on that 1 hour drive from Kapolei, perhaps. It's a place that you share music and you share mana'o. It's a place of responsibility because people are depending on you for information, for entertainment, and they're depending on you for a sense of security that the world is going to be okay or not. Well, Madam President, several days into the special session when the Houses had began their hearing and eventual floor debate, I received an email from 2 former radio colleagues of mine who are now hosting a morning radio show. I won't say who they are because their ratings may go up or down after the speech. But I'd like to quote the email. Aloha, brother. We are getting all kaumaha, which means heaviness or with grief or very sad. We are getting all kaumaha over all the goings on at the Capitol, specifically what is happening outside, with the two sides being so vicious towards each other. So much so, there is a realization that trying to do anything from our radio standpoint, other than just to cover the activity, would be detrimental. But what will happen afterwards? Will there be a way to bring the two sides together? Yes, we have differences, but we can teach our children that we can still live together on the same island. Just some thoughts, just some don't know if there is a way or if it's too powerful an issue to do this with. Have a good morning. Aloha. And Madam President, I responded with this. Aloha. Mahalo for caring for our people. You are correct about your impact. Be skillful in how you proceed. Balance is the key to your credibility. You can present a calming voice in the midst and at the conclusion of this process. Calling for respect is a good thing. This has been an incredible example of civic engagement, warts and all. Not sure moving to Ho'oponopono quickly will or can help, though. Whenever we're done, a cooling off period must take place. Whatever is decided here will be of both great joy and great disappointment. You can encourage aloha throughout, and when we're POW, encourage us all to get back to our daily lives. Enough for now. We'll get through this, and the sun will come up tomorrow. Proceed with caution and aloha. Hope this helps. Brother Brick. Madam President, I'll conclude with this. I am honored to have introduced this bill for your consideration and will follow the Judiciary's chair and his recommendation. Colleagues, I would ask that you join me in supporting SB1 HD1. Mahalo, Madam President.
Senator Ige.
Yes, Madam President. I rise to speak in support of this measure.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Members, as we all know, the recent decision by the United States Supreme Court in United States versus Windsor held that Section 3 of the Defense of Marriage Act unlawfully discriminated against married same-sex couples by prohibiting the federal government from recognizing those marriages and by denying federal rights, benefits, protections, and responsibilities to those couples. Members, I have had the honor and privilege to serve to represent my communities for all of the period of the debate on same-sex marriage and been able to participate in all of those discussions. I just wanted to commend the chair of the Judiciary and Labor Committees and the chairs in the House as well. I do believe that the hearings that we've conducted over the past 2 weeks have given all of those in support of and in opposition to their opportunity to voice their concerns, raise the issues, and have questions asked and answered. I do believe that it is time for the state of Hawaii to follow those others. I support Senate Bill 1, House Draft 1, because it provides to same-sex couples the same rights, benefits, protections, and responsibilities as opposite-sex couples under the law. At the same time, work has been done by those committee chairs to ensure that protection of the religious freedoms of churches, clergy, and other related organizations that are guaranteed by our Constitution and our laws. For those reasons, members, although we may not have chosen to convene at this point in time, we are here and we must do our job. I encourage all of you to vote in support of these measures. Thank you.
Senator Sparrow.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to rise in support of this measure.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Yesterday was Veterans Day, and my father served 21 years in the Navy. I have a son who is recently promoted to captain in the Marine Corps. And as I reflected about Veterans Day and attended ceremonies, we honor and recognize the veterans on the battlefield who fought and who died. And they died for our freedom, for our country, our nation, the greatest nation in the world, where millions of people come here and flock from other countries, and you could see it in the gallery today. The different ethnicities, the religious individuals, and their faiths and beliefs. And we come to this great nation because of the freedoms that we have. And yesterday I was remembering those veterans, those men and women, the soldiers who died for these freedoms. The freedoms of religion. And many of those who died were not only Christians. They were Jews, they were Hindus, they were Buddhists, and all the other religious faiths. And there were many individuals who were not even believers, who gave their lives for this country so that we may worship who we want, decide to vote or not to vote, live the way we want as long as we're not hurting other people, and love who we want to love. Now, many people have already stated that this has been a rushed session, but the Judiciary Chairman behind me so eloquently stated that this was not a rushed session. But more importantly, the United States Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, there is no appeal to what the United States Supreme Court has stated in their decisions. The United States Supreme Court, the conservative United States Supreme Court, has opened the door to same-sex marriage. And that door will never close. Our society, our civilization is going through a transition, yes. Some say this is a redefinition of marriage. Others say it is a change. But remember, when it was normal to marry teenagers, not only in this country but in other countries, and it's still something happening in other countries, which our country and other civilized nations are trying to change. We do want to change marriage in some respect. And this is about government acknowledging two individuals. Government, not churches. For the measure before us is very clear. Churches, religious institutions, will have exemptions and protections. Churches, religious organizations, non-profit religious organizations will have exemptions and protections. If your church does not want to conduct a same-sex marriage, it does not have to conduct a same-sex marriage. No one is forcing it upon you. No one is making you go to a same-sex marriage if you do not want to go to a same-sex marriage. You can avoid it completely, and you won't be arrested. You can avoid it completely and live your life the way you're living it today. Now, we have heard fears that have come in the thousands of hours of testimony. But I can truly tell you, we would not be passing this measure if we thought those fears and concerns would happen. Collectively in this body of my esteemed colleagues, we have individuals who have served 10 years, 20 years, close to 30 years. And we have been looking out for the best interest of the people of Hawaii to the best of our ability. And we know there are differences, and we cannot always please 100% of the people. But in this case, we've made that decision that to allow same-sex marriage will not be a major detriment to society like some people think. We reject that notion. That is why we're passing this bill. We will make certain that our children are taught what they must learn in school. And much of that will have to do with respect, tolerance, and differences that this gallery embodies. The differences of humanity, the difference of people. Many of us have friends and relatives who are LGBT. I do. And they are loving, caring individuals. They are productive members of our society. And we've even heard it from the opponents who say, yes, they are our friends, they are our family members. I love them, we want the best for them. But if you want the best for them, how can you deny them the right to love and live with someone for the rest of their lives? How do you look a person in the eye and tell them, you're my equal, except for in marriage? I don't understand that one. I don't get that one. Especially when you hear the words of the senator from Mililani, God is love. And I remember a song growing up, and they'll know we are Christians by our love, by our love. Yes, they'll know we are Christians by our love. It saddens me that we've had so much divisiveness, so much hate. I saw an email last night, a woman said that the typhoon in the Philippines was due to the sinners and those the rebellions in the Philippines. My God, what are we thinking? When this bill passes, and we know it will, we must come together. We must continue this discussion, not necessarily here at the Capitol, but in community meetings, church meetings, dining halls, zippies, parks. And we must understand that this is not going away. In 1998, 0 states had same-sex marriage. Today, Hawaii is poised to be the 16th state. The trend is continuing, ladies and gentlemen, citizens of Hawaii. The thought process is moving forward. I predict that it will be fairly soon when you will have an additional 10 states, bringing it to 26 states, the majority of the states in the United States of America that supports this notion, while at the same time preserving religious freedoms and the right to worship and believe what one wants to believe. And I know that when I die, God will not judge me on who I married. Although I know that marriage is sacred and important, definitely. Although I sometimes wonder, is the first marriage as sacred as the second marriage for some individuals? Or maybe the third marriage, which is the most sacred? And I wonder why, in some cases, it's fairly simple to get an annulment. But yes, marriage is sacred. But God will not judge me on who I married, but He will judge me on my words. He will judge us on our actions. He will judge us based on what is in our hearts, how we lived our lives. Did we live it in a way that God was pleased? Again, I want to thank the Judiciary Chairman for his work and his committee, the House of Representatives for their hours of receiving and dissecting the testimonies. And colleagues, this is a monumental moment in Hawaii. This is a historic occasion, whether you are for this or against it. And we will look back on this day, on these last 2 weeks, and we will see that this vote was the right vote for Hawaii and for our nation. Thank you very much.
Further discussion, Senator Ruderman.
Madam President, I rise in support.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. I am very happy that we're voting today on extending equal rights to gays and lesbians. This is one more step on our society's path toward liberty and justice for all. As we saw massive public input from both sides, my office did an analysis which I find revealing. Although total input was against marriage equality, input from my district was remarkably 80% in favor. In fact, it was more than 5 to 1. Is this because my district is more in favor than most? Or because of more statewide mass mailings coordinated by a few organizations opposing equality? I believe it's both. I'm proud of my colleagues for the courage to do what's so clearly right. I want to acknowledge the strong leadership of our Judiciary Chair and his colleague in the House, and thank him for helping bring us to this point. In the past 2 weeks, we've seen an outpouring of comments from both sides of this issue. This was expected and good for our democracy. What I did not expect was the coordinated expressions of hatred and intolerance in the name of God and church. I have been shocked and saddened by this, and especially disturbed by the fact that some religious leaders taught a perversion of their faith and encouraged their flock to practice these hurtful passions instead of the true message of their faith. I believe the pastors who advocated this intolerance must now work to reverse the damage they have done to their congregations by now siding with love and teaching love. I deeply thank the many leaders and representatives from a variety of religious organizations, including many Christian churches, urging us to side with love and acceptance. I'm the son of a religious scholar. As I understand the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, the core of his message is love. Love thy neighbor, love thy enemy, love thy God. Along with this, he practiced and preached tolerance, acceptance, and forgiveness, and gave us the golden rule: treat others as you would want to be treated. I try to picture Jesus standing at the door of a temple, blocking the entrance to someone whose heart is filled with love. The image is absurd. On the contrary, I'm sure Jesus opens his arms in welcome to those with love in their hearts, and most especially those who have faced persecution for their beliefs. If he heard someone preaching hatred, intolerance, and bigotry in his name in his temple, that false leader would be evicted, while welcoming all those who practice compassion, acceptance, and love. Let's just ask ourselves, who would Jesus hate? So here we are. It's true that we must now heal the divide in our community. I call upon those on both sides to help this healing. A few people on both sides have crossed the line of civility, and in some cases, their lack of aloha has swayed legislators in the opposite direction of that intended. Forgiveness and love will be needed to heal. I'm glad for the exemptions we have included so that we can move forward on the more important issue of basic equal rights. The ultimate way that healing will occur is for all individuals and organizations to put behind them this latest wave of intolerance. Yes, those churches that choose to do so can now legally discriminate against gays and lesbians in the name of religious freedom. But there is no moral or ethical excuse for such discrimination, now or ever. If that's not clear, just insert any other category, such as race, in place of same-gender couples, and the indefensibility of the position becomes clear. When you are ready to correct this mistake, you will open your doors and teach your flock acceptance rather than intolerance, courage rather than fear, and love rather than hate. Then our community will be healed from this rift, and then we can move forward as one. To those who could not accept gays and lesbians as members of your community yesterday, today is a bright new day, and it is your time to learn to do so. We all stand ready to help each other in this growth. Now we can achieve and celebrate a great victory. I thank all the members of the House, Senate, and public who showed bravery in standing up for equal rights for all. I urge all my colleagues to vote yes and send a strong message of unity as we move forward. Today in the Aloha State, thank God, love wins. Love is love. Thank you.
Senator Keith Agaron.
Thank you, Madam President. I speak in favor of the bill.
You may.
Passing this bill is what's consistent with fairness, equity, and simple justice. My support for this bill is based on the basic American value that all citizens are entitled to equal treatment, and on the fundamental fairness as a hallmark of our community. I think over the last 2 weeks, we've learned that many of us have not evolved. I have not evolved. I voted for the Hawaii Civil Unions Law as a member of the State House in both 2010 and 2011. I've consistently supported the idea that government should encourage committed, loving relationships between adults as the basis of stronger families and healthy communities. It's not a liberal view. It's an American idea. Former U.S. Solicitor General and prominent conservative lawyer Ted Olson has explained, quote, "Conservatives and liberals alike need to come together on principles that surely unite us. Certainly, we can agree on the value of strong families, lasting domestic relationships, and communities populated by persons with recognized and sanctioned bonds to one another. Confining some of our neighbors and friends who share these same values to an outlaw or second-class status undermines their sense of belonging and weakens their ties with the rest of us and what should be our common aspirations. Even those whose religious convictions preclude endorsement of what they may perceive as an unacceptable lifestyle should recognize that disapproval should not warrant stigmatization and unequal treatment. He continues, when we refuse to accord this status to gays and lesbians, we discourage them from forming the same relationships we encourage for others, and we are also telling them, those who love them, and society as a whole, that their relationships are less worthy, less legitimate, less permanent, and less valued. We demean their relationships and we demean them as individuals. I cannot imagine how we benefit as a society by doing so, unquote. That's a long quote, but Ted Olson is a smart, thoughtful, and strong advocate. And Madam President, on those points, I find myself agreeing with Ted Olson. I find it short-sighted to pretend that the diversity of families and relationships we all know and value in our Hawaii simply don't exist. This bill acknowledges that equal treatment and equal rights must extend to those family relationships in Hawaii. We're today deciding that those intimate commitments and relationships are worthy of equal dignity and recognition. We've all taken an oath of office. In taking my oath of office, I agreed to look at every issue and to be willing to make a decision about those issues. In a representative democracy, we're neither simply mouthpieces for the loudest or the most voices in our community, nor are we completely independent actors. All of us were elected, or some of us appointed, to take votes based on the information provided. We were not elected or selected to take public opinion polls on every issue that comes before us. The question of whether Hawaii should recognize same-sex marriages is before us this morning. The State Attorney General's office earlier confirmed in a letter to the majority policy leader that amending the Hawaii marriage statute falls within the powers of the state legislature under the state constitution's Article 3, Section 1. Now, I don't know that members of this chamber needed that confirmation. I would guess most members of the Senate already knew that. It's certainly entirely consistent with the actions of the legislature in the past. Perhaps the most obvious example comes from 1994, when the state legislature, reacting to the 1993 Hawaii Supreme Court decision on same-sex marriage, passed what became Act 217. Act 217 amended Hawaii's marriage law to limit eligibility for a marriage license to opposite-sex couples. In fact, the legislature has amended the marriage statute many times, including adopting and recognizing no-fault divorce principles for ending Hawaii marriages. Today's Hawaii marriage law is nothing like your grandparents' or your great-grandparents' marriage law. So let's be clear. The legislature is dealing with the secular, legal, and statutory structure of what the state recognizes as civil marriage. We are dealing with a state statute. I realize for many this is one of those issues where it is difficult to maintain a distinction between church and state. Each member of the legislature brings his or her personal experiences and knowledge into the debate, as well as their understanding of the views of their family, supporters, community leaders, and what people on the street, in Safeway or Long's Drugs, or Tasaka's Guriguri, or Takamiya's, tells them. I actually reject what some seem to argue, namely that we should, even if that were possible, divorce ourselves from our personal religious foundations. My own faith informs much of how I approach issues, but then people will say, my church, the Episcopal Church, has expressed support for treating all Hawaii residents in an equal manner, and supports SB1. Part of the challenge and controversy involving Hawaii's marriage, civil unions, reciprocal beneficiaries, and public accommodations law is the intersection between government legally recognizing relationships that confer some kind of additional obligations or benefits as a result of that status, as well as the historical and traditional religious and moral beliefs about intimate, deeply personal relationships. The term marriage is one of those difficult areas because the law, the government, continues to afford married couples a certain legal status that does not extend to other legal relationships. And marriage also holds specific meanings to many through religion, culture, and tradition. I give great thanks to the chair of the Judiciary Committee, as well as to the House, for the language they've crafted. But I have no illusions that the legislature has been able to craft language for our statute that can address or satisfy concerns and fears about changing the historic, legal, and moral understanding and meaning of marriage. But under our constitutional form of government, the Bill of Rights, adopted as amendments to the U.S. Constitution at the federal level and included in the Hawaii State Constitution, are meant in large part to protect dissenter rights. The Free Exercise Clause in the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was written to ensure that government does not infringe on religious freedom, especially the religious conscience of this favored sex. But we must remember that all of the bundles of rights preserved in the Bill of Rights and other parts of the U.S. Constitution exist in a state of balance and tension with other rights, including the important rights conferred under the Equal Protection Clause. The debate in Hawaii over same-sex marriage did not begin this summer or in the past 2 weeks. All of us old enough to have been of voting age in the 1990s can remember the court cases and the political campaigns and the legislative actions and elections which turned in part on same-sex marriage. As both supporters and opponents of the legislation point out, Hawaii has been debating the merits of same-sex marriage since the Bear versus Lewin lawsuit. Due to the governor's early announcement calling for a special session, supporters and opponents of same-sex marriage have been providing input on the issue over the last month. In this special session, the legislature has dedicated more time than would have been available in any regular session. Almost 67 hours of testimony on one bill. But we should be equally frank and acknowledge that the arguments for and against remain essentially the same. And not to make light of it, unless you now believe the devil is a Red Sox fan. It comes down to this. While I acknowledge the views of those who are opposed to same-sex marriage due to religious or moral concerns, our secular laws confirming benefits to and imposing obligations on residents must be applied equally. Given the U.S. Supreme Court rulings indicating that only couples married under the laws of their state have access to federal rights and benefits, I support passing this law. Our community, no doubt, will remain polarized on whether legal marriage should be expanded to include same-sex couples. Whether or not the legislature approves the bill and the governor signs the bill into law, churches will be able to continue to sanction only the marriages they choose to recognize as religious sacraments or that otherwise conform with their religious and moral tenets. Both drafts of Senate Bill 1 ensure that. If the bill becomes law, however, the government will extend any benefits and obligations our laws confer on qualifying couples who choose to marry, whether married in a religious ceremony or not, and it will do so in a fair and equitable fashion. As I said briefly, and I apologize, Madam President, for taking so much time, on third reading on this floor, legally recognizing same-sex marriage will do nothing to affect my own marriage. My spouse and I remain responsible for maintaining the love and commitment required in our relationship, not whether we as a government, whether we as a legislature, and whether we as a community exclude or welcome other Hawaii committed couples from entering into their marriages. Passing this bill is the result that fair application of civil law requires, and is the result consistent with the oath I took to uphold the U.S. and Hawaii constitutions. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of House Draft 1.
Further discussion, members? If not, are we ready for the question? Senator Nishihara.
Thank you. You know, I'm voting in support of the amendment.
Please proceed.
We are all elected by our respective communities and districts, but we are also required to decide upon issues that concern the whole state. No bill is perfect in all regard. Like I was quoted as saying, the good should not fall victim to the perfect. The arc of history bends toward equal justice, treatment, and fairness. This is just a part of bending that arc in the direction to which our state and federal constitutions calls us to do. We cannot shirk that responsibility. And as a final comment, just as the beautiful rainbow completes its arc amidst the clouds and rain, this bill, amidst the debate and hearings, it too will move to complete this arc of justice. I believe that we, as a state, will move toward that rainbow of justice. And as a last comment, my wife and I have been married 42 years. I do not believe by passage of this law would diminish our relationship in one bit, and we also believe that we should not deny that possibility for those of the opposite couples. Thank you.
Further discussion? Senator Sloan.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, I rise in opposition to the bill.
Please proceed.
I feel so much love in the room today. And we've heard so many remarks. Earlier, I was schooled on becoming part of the Democratic Party's rally. And of course, this issue has been politicized from the beginning. We were told that there is no rush. And yet, in fact, there was a rush. From the beginning, we were told that this was going to be a 5-day session. And then it was extended, and now we're into our third week. The governor, his hands are shaking. His pen is ready to sign as fast as he can so that we can beat Illinois. And we were told by the majority leader, no less, that there will be no compromise, no delay. And then we learned that after we pass this bill into law, we'll all get together and have town meetings and discuss it and meet at Zippy's. I'm all for that. That's good. Reminds me of another piece of legislation. After we pass it, we'll read it. And then we'll find out what it's all about and what the unintended consequences are. Well, how's that working out for you with Obamacare? This is not a partisan issue because we have leaders in both parties, in both houses, that have spoken in opposition. And yet those of us that do speak in opposition have been ridiculed, as have religious believers. We've been told basically that we're foolish. Other words were used, that our voices don't count. We were also told this morning that it is the hand of man that has bent the arc in a direction that man feels, or at least some men feel, and women, it should go. Not the hand of God, not the divinity that many of us still believe in, but man will bend that arc. We're also told, and we were told earlier, that we will hear from the people. My kudos go to the House, too, for their strength for their patience, for their determination, and their strong bladders in all of the hearings. I believe it is incumbent upon all of us to listen to the people, to hear them, and then to act responsibly. And those of us that have different viewpoints, we have those viewpoints for various reasons. And you've heard many explanations this morning, none more important than another. But you've also heard the names of Martin Luther King and John Kennedy and others bandied about, and yet nowhere in my research have I found that any of these people came out for same-sex marriage. Love, yes. Compassion, yes. Equal rights, yes. As I had said a couple of weeks ago, and was reiterated by the good senator from Kapolei today, no court has ruled that marriage is a civil right. And yet we continue to try to change the language and try to make something into something it is not. We have debated this issue, and we have learned from people their different viewpoints. But in the end, this is kind of like the situation in the Middle East over thousands of years. You can try to force people to do something that they don't believe in, but it doesn't make it so. I agree with all my colleagues, however, that raise the issue of civility and respect. I think that should be paramount. And there have been losses on both sides, not just one side, on both sides. And there are organizations from the mainland and other places that have helped both sides, not one side. We are told that this is the wave, that this is our future. And people, I think, are really surprised at the passion and the participation over the last couple of weeks here at our Capitol. Parenthetically, a ranking came out a week ago that listed the political and social involvement of people within a state. And Madam President, Hawaii ranked last, as we so often do in all national rankings. We ranked last in people participating. Well, obviously, that survey was done earlier than 3 weeks ago, because we've seen an outpouring of individuals at this Capitol like no other time in our history. I, for one, think it's a wonderful thing. From people from both sides, or three sides, or four sides, coming together and giving their point of view passionately, because of principle, because of what they believe in. I know that a lot of people do not understand, those in the religious community who have been so fervent in their opposition to this legislation. But walk in their shoes for just a moment. Look over the last 10 or 15 years. Look at our nation. Look at our state. Look at one by one our traditions and our values stripped away, usually in the courts, based on legislation that was passed in prior sessions. We are told not to be afraid, that nothing different is going to happen. It's not going to change our lives. And yet that's very naive, because we've seen in the past other legislation on other issues that in fact have changed our lives, have changed our values. And this is no exception. This will do many of the things that those who testified said it will do in terms of education, business, religion, and social conduct, because that is the aim of those folks who have continued over the decades to insist, unlike what was said earlier, to go where not just a question of not wanted, but not legally entitled to until the laws were changed. And that's what we're doing, changing the laws and providing entitlement and privilege and license. And we can have all the fine words in the world. We can describe other situations, and we can, again, be very poetic about love, but this is not about love. And we can talk about emotional instances, and this should not be about emotion. It should be about the law. I'm always interested in people that quote our Constitution, and even conservatives, on one specific incident, while the rest of the time they usually talk about how unimportant those people and that Constitution is. And by the way, again, there was some misinformation early on about the Defense of Marriage Act. It was not repealed by the U.S. Supreme Court. Section 3 was repealed. And the Supreme Court did not give its stamp of approval on same-sex marriages. And by the way, just to remember, the vote on that particular bill was 5-4. And to remember, the individual who signed that bill into law was William Jefferson Clinton, a good card-carrying Democrat. I was at a neighborhood board meeting the other night, and I was questioned on my report and my opinion of how the not-so-special special session was going. And a young member of the board questioned me and said, "Why do you keep talking about that vote in 1998? My God, that was 15 years ago." And I pointed out to her that the Constitution was over 200 years, and that a constitutional amendment passed in Hawaii in 1998 still has the force of law and still will after the vote today. But the fact of the matter is, the people that voted for that constitutional amendment, and I was one, as was pointed out by the Judiciary Chairman the other day, I think he neglected to mention that the entire Senate voted unanimously to support that constitutional amendment, which was drafted by a Democrat. In that vote, people thought and were told and were led to believe and relied upon the government telling them, if you vote for this, you're voting for traditional marriage between one man and one woman. That's why over 70% of the vote went the way it did. And now we're told we should evolve and we should change that and grab onto the wave that's coming and sweeping the nation. Yet it's hard to believe from the testimony that we had over the last 3 weeks that there is a wave. It's not just people of one party. It's not just young people. It's not just religious people. People have differences. And you can't legislate morality. You can try, but you can't do it. And one of the remarks today was, which is absolutely true, you really can't take these votes personally because the person who was your biggest opponent yesterday may be your biggest supporter tomorrow. I do take issue with the statement, however, that was made a few moments ago, that the legislature has always done things for the people here, made life better, and this will be another example of that. If this legislature had acted for the people and listened to the people, we wouldn't have the second highest tax burden in the nation. We wouldn't have the highest welfare in the nation. We wouldn't have growing homelessness in our state. We wouldn't have an economy that is struggling and that we are doing nothing about it. And that people, gay, straight, everyone, is having a harder and harder time to take care of their family and loved ones because of what we have done or not done in this state capital. So to rely on us to be your moral compass after we've done such a poor job of being your economic compass is really asking an awful lot. The division among peoples is serious and it's saddening. Yes, we all have people within our family or friends who are homosexual or who are different in other ways. And yet we found a way to embrace them. But this in-your-face politics brought on by the governor and by certain leaders in this legislature to say, you're going to have this no matter what, and we're going to do it on our time schedule, and we don't care how many thousands of people come down, because you're ignorant. You who oppose this legislation, you're ignorant, or you're stupid, or you don't like certain people. Nothing farther from the truth. We're talking about an issue that really should not be a part of government. I've said that for 2 decades. The fact that 1,138 federal benefits are involved tells me that there are many, many, too many federal benefits involved. And that once you succumb to a benefit, then you are going to be subject to the whims of politicians who can evolve and change their minds. We have, as a society, become too dependent on government. And those people that don't like the idea of individual states and states' rights forget our history and don't have a good read of the United States Constitution. Because the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were all about limiting government, fear of government, intolerance of government looking down on the people that support it, and doing things in opposition. And that attitude goes far beyond this single issue. I'm sorry that on Saturday, a press conference between the Judiciary Chairman and Majority Leader resulted in the statement that, hey, we've got this under control, this will be done in an hour. Sorry, we're into 2 hours now. Was it rushed? You betcha. Was there an attempt to listen and to reach a compromise, to bring people together? No. I was at that Veterans Day ceremony yesterday, and it was wonderful because we all came together for veterans. And we'll all come together to help the poor, ravaged Filipino people. And these are things that we can see and we can agree upon, and nobody has to force us. And nobody has to talk about a victory over our own people, a victory over God, a victory over religion. And yet that's what we're doing here. And among those unintended consequences, there's been debate over the last several weeks about what's going to happen in the schools. Will the schools change? Will the curriculum change? And people were quick to say, oh, no, it's not going to have any effect at all. In my own district, in a very fine school, New Valley Intermediate, there's been a program introduced. It's called Pono Choices. By its self-description, it is, quote, a culturally responsive teen pregnancy and STI prevention program, unquote. That program has expended nearly $1 million to date. If you read through the curriculum of that program, it brings up homosexuality. It has 2 scenarios of traditional marriage couples and then one of same-sex. The 2 scenarios of the traditional marriage are given a negative response, whereas the same-sex scenario is the positive thing. Well, maybe I'm wrong and they're right, because if they want to stop pregnancy, same-sex marriage is the way to do it. But this program, which has already started in my area, is due to roll out in 30 other schools. And will parents have the right to opt out? No. Students? No. We can talk about that, but they haven't been given that right, and they won't be given that right. I got a lesson this morning on cultural history and homosexuality. It's amazing how in the last 15 years so many things have changed. I had a reporter ask me about that the other day. What do I think is different now than 15 years ago? Is it a wave of consciousness, everybody waking up and saying, just like interracial marriage, which was wrong and had nothing to do with this, just like slavery, which was wrong and had nothing to do with this, that we've evolved and we've understood? I said, no, I don't think so. I think it's more of a political push. There are dozens of organizations today that were not around in 1998. The news media, well, we had 2 papers then, but that was old-fashioned competition. Now we just have a monopoly. They're cheerleaders. They don't report the news. They try to bend that arc and shape the news. You can see it in the pictures that they use, the descriptions, the underestimating of crowds. We have a lot of people, for a lot of reasons, want to be in the face of others who have different beliefs. We should value those beliefs. That is part of what has made our country great, along with the civility and the respect. I have to tell you, Madam President, when we started having these enhanced security measures in the Capitol, I was not and am not happy seeing large numbers of sheriffs and other people, seeing our people separated outside by lines and fences, by being told where to sit. If you're pro-marriage, sit over here. If you're not pro-marriage, sit over here. What do the people do that are pro-gay or pro-love but don't happen to like that particular legislation? Where do they sit? It's so ridiculous, we even had signs for same-sex marriage restrooms and non-same-sex marriage restrooms. How can we bring people together if it is the government that is forcing them apart? This morning when I was driving in, I saw the ambulances and the fire truck, and I understood that someone needed medical assistance and was taken in an ambulance. Will the ambulance drivers in the future be forced to say same-sex hospital or non-same-sex hospital? You laugh now. Come back and talk to me in 3 or 4 years. Because all the things that people said years ago, oh, that would never happen here, that couldn't happen, people of good judgment will make the right decision. I'm here to tell you we've failed you. And as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, the people that have come down here to be congratulated and not to be discouraged, and those of us that do believe in the power of prayer know that you don't always get the results you want on your prayer, but ultimately you will. And don't be frustrated, and never, ever, 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 ever give up. But I told you that you are among people in the only state in the Union that has neither statewide initiative, statewide referendum, statewide recall, statewide term limits. You're just good enough to vote for us and to pay our bills. Nothing else. You're not smart enough. If this was such an important issue, and I said from the outset I didn't think it was and it did not merit a special session, economic recovery and our other problems do. If it were such an important issue, then yes, the people should decide. Or the people who thought they decided 15 years ago will have a day in court because, quite frankly, they feel disillusioned and disenfranchised, that their vote didn't count for anything. Was it mass stupidity? Did 70% of the people really not understand Did they not understand what was presented and written by the state government and by other independent agencies? We'll have to think about that. In terms of majority versus minority rights, no, the majority is not always right. But then again, in this body, as the minority, I'm never listened to anyway, so it doesn't matter. No majority, no minority. But the people are restless, nationally and locally, because despite the fact that we pat ourselves on the back and tell you how wonderful we are, the people don't understand that and don't believe that. And there's going to come a time when there will be another revolution of thought and purpose and commitment. So the thousands of you that may feel disgruntled today because of our process, don't feel so. Get involved. I was sad to learn many of you were not even registered to vote. Register to vote. Go to meetings. Support a candidate. Run for yourself. If you don't like our positions, then work to replace us, whatever that position is. That is your right. That's what democracy is all about. But I would say in summation that all of the things that have been said are important, but not so important as working on the people's business. I took a lot of criticism a couple of weeks ago because I said at that point it was told how historic the day was going to be. And then the next day, and then the next day. Now, today is historic again. I stand corrected. It is historic. I was reminded by my office manager today that the date is 11/12/13. And that sequence of numbers won't happen again for a long time, not in my lifetime. I was also told by majority leaders over the weekend, this is the most important vote you'll ever make. You will be defined by this vote today. Well, yes and no. Yes, it will be an important vote. Yes, many of us will be defined by our vote today. But to say that this issue, its sexual orientation, has risen above so many issues that we need to grapple with and have punted, I think does a great disservice, not only to this body, but also to the people of this state. We are a great state. We are a great people. We can embrace our diversity. But that does not mean we should be in lockstep. Look at what happened last week. A member of the House, a Democrat, was called out by the very loving and compassionate people who were urging same-sex marriage. And they condemned her because they said, my God, she is a homosexual and she didn't vote with us. It was the same thing that happened to Clarence Thomas, an African-American brilliant jurist. He's black, why doesn't he vote with the rest of us? Independence of thought, liberty, standing up for what you believe. That's what our nation is all about. That's what our government should be all about. Not how long you served in office, not how many projects you brought home, or not how you voted today on same-sex marriage. So I would say that, in passing, congratulations to the people. We have never had an outpouring like this. And yes, the Senate perhaps rushed in cutting off people from the debate, where the House did not. I don't know if more hours or more study would change anything, because I don't think the votes have changed from before we had this session. But I do know it's going to have lasting and serious consequences. It is going to affect small businesses negatively, and education and parents, and religious organizations. I will stand by my words earlier. this religious exemption is not strong and is not positive. And we will see, right after this bill is signed into law, attempts by those who do want to go into your face, who are not thinking about loving relationships, but how they can defeat somebody else and quell free speech. But let them know that we will still be ready. And as long as we can stand, and as long as we have a voice, and as long as we have a hand to vote, we will continue on this path because it is the right path. So I urge all my members to rethink before they vote today. Think about those 29 amendments proposed in the House. Many of them that the proponents of same-sex marriage had to admit were really good amendments. But they voted against them anyway. Why? Because they could. Just like when we passed reciprocal beneficiaries and many of us said it was flawed, it was. We had to come back afterwards. And after we passed civil unions, we said it was flawed, and it was. And we had to come back afterwards. So by your vote today, you're not erasing history. You're not erasing unintended consequences. But you're not bringing people together. And you're not doing the best that you can do as a legislator and servant of the people. Madam President, I call for a roll call vote. Thank you.
Senator Ihara. May I remind the audience, please?
Madam President.
Well, hold on. Let me just remind the audience, please refrain from any approval or disapproval. Thank you. Senator Ihara.
Madam President, I rise in support of Senate Bill 1.
Please proceed.
Madam President, 2 years ago, the legislature provided to same-gender couples all the rights, benefits, protections, and responsibilities that married couples already had under state law. The state of Hawaii cannot give same-sex couples any more rights because we gave them all already. Even if we wanted to provide more rights, there are no more rights to give. The U.S. Supreme Court has now required the United States government to recognize same-sex marriages, and it is time for Hawaii to do the same. If we don't, Hawaii's same-sex couples would have to travel to California, Washington, or other states to get married, to receive many but not all of the available federal benefits. I don't believe the perceived harm to traditional marriage justifies denying federal benefits to same-sex couples. Nor does the lack of an exemption for personal religious conscience, which no state already provides, justifies denying federal benefits and the right to marry. On this issue, there is obviously no consensus among stakeholders. There is disagreement, and my vote today will make me part of that disagreement. Opponents may disagree with me, but this is what I believe. I believe I am no better than any of my gay or lesbian friends. I believe there is nothing wrong with my gay and lesbian friends or myself for having that belief. I believe my gay and lesbian friends should have the same rights that I have. And I believe I shouldn't have to say this, and I have not done so until now. But I state these beliefs because of the disagreement on this issue. Madam President, I'd like to now address the matter of whether the legislature has the power to allow same-sex marriage. Apparently, some people still don't understand that, but I'll want to try to explain.
As long as you stay germane to the motion.
Yes.
Thank you.
The Attorney General's opinion on this issue is clear. The legislature has always had the power to authorize same-sex marriage. Under Article 3, Section 1 of the Constitution, which states in relevant part, The legislative power of the state shall be vested in the legislature. Such power shall be extended to all rightful subjects of legislation, not inconsistent with this Constitution or the Constitution of the United States. The 1998 constitutional amendment gave the legislature an additional power, the power to reserve marriage to opposite-sex couples. The 1998 constitutional amendment did not take away or limit any of the legislature's powers, including that of authorizing same-sex marriage. Instead, the 1998 constitutional amendment only gave the legislature a new power, the power to discriminate against same-sex couples in marriage. And even this new power is optional, not mandatory to use. Madam President, it is fitting that the final vote of this bill is here in the Senate. Today's vote closes the circle and the return of a boomerang that was launched here on April 29th, 1997. But even before 1997, the Senate was a staunch supporter of equal rights. After the famous Levinson opinion in Bear versus Lewin was issued in May 1993, pressure mounted steadily to pass a constitutional amendment in Hawaii to ban same-sex marriage. Even under intense pressure in 1996, our then Senate Judiciary Chair Ray Gralty opposed any constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage. I want to today acknowledge Senator Gralty because he stood up for equal rights and paid the political price, the loss of his Senate seat that same year. I want to take us back to 1997, 16 years ago. I was the co-majority leader and recall the general belief that a marriage constitutional amendment could no longer be blocked. The plaintiffs in the Bear lawsuit had won a circuit court ruling in December 1996, and it was all but certain that Hawaii's Supreme Court would confirm the lower court's ruling that legalized same-sex marriage in the state, unless the legislature acted that year. That session, 1997, the Senate Judiciary Committee had co-chairs, Senators Avery Chumbley and Matt Matsunaga. The House had the veteran Judiciary Chair, Terrence Tom. From beginning to end, the House position was to put on the ballot a constitutional amendment to limit marriage to opposite-sex couples. The Senate Judiciary Chairs proposed limiting marriage between a man and a woman, but only if it was not a violation of equal protection. They later proposed letting the legislature decide whether to limit marriage to opposite-sex couples. A reciprocal beneficiaries bill was also part of the negotiations that year. In the end, Senators Chumbley and Matsunaga were able to get far fewer marriage rights and benefits than they had wanted to for reciprocal beneficiaries. And the House agreed to give the legislature the power to limit marriage to opposite-sex couples. The constitutional amendment debate was on House Bill 117 on April 29th, the last day of the 1997 session. In his floor speech, House Judiciary Chair Tom said that if the constitutional amendment was approved by voters, there would be no need for further legislation. The legislature would not have to reenact marriage legislation because the statutes already limited marriage to opposite-sex couples. So as you recall, after the 1998 constitutional amendment was adopted, the legislature took no action because the constitutional amendment basically allowed us to discriminate, and that's about all it did. Senator Norman Sakamoto, an opponent of same-sex marriage, stated, and I quote, "I support this bill because it gives voters a clear choice on whether or not the Hawaii Constitution should be amended, and because the bill is easily understandable for the voters and will be fair to all. Passage of this measure will empower the legislature, who are the elected representatives of the people to take action and not appointed judges to decide who can get married, end quote. As Senator Sakamoto said it, the 1998 constitutional amendment was clear and understandable. Back on the House floor, this is April 29th, 1997, Representative Gene Ward stated in relevant parts, "A few weeks ago, Judge Moon rightly said that we have the trump card in this particular discussion. What I believe he forgot to say is that it's the people of Hawaii that hold the trump card, and not those who wear the black robes. Unfortunately, the way the bill is written, however, it's those who sit in these seats," he was referring to legislator seats, "who will decide whether there is same-sex marriage in the future. The social order that this one relies upon are those who are in the Senate and the House to say, as the words define, the power to regulate marriage between opposite-sex couples, not in the people's mind, but in the minds of those who are elected representatives." Representative Ward continued, "As you know, Mr. Speaker, the first version had it that marriage would be defined in the state of Hawaii as between one man and one woman. What we have here is something that I think if the Senate or this House is so inclined in a matter of time, even next year, we're going to have same-sex marriage." How pathetic. Prophetic. In 1997, Representative Ward and the rest of us knew that letting the people vote and adopt the 1998 constitutional amendment meant that the people empowered the legislature to decide on marriage. He continues by saying, "It seems as though the Senate apparently wanted it to be as it is today, because each election, Mr. Speaker, as we're asked to stand, what's our stand on education, or what's your stand on crime, sometimes it's abortion, it's going to be, well, what's your stand on same-sex marriage?" Madam President, as a matter of fact, as you recall, this past election, last year, the Star Advertiser did ask us that very same question, and I did state that I was for same-sex marriage. I should note that while Representative Ward was giving his speech, sitting a few feet away from him was Representative Bob McDermott, who spoke in support of the bill shortly after Representative Ward. Now back to today, we have come full circle, because instead of a constitutional amendment simply banning same-sex marriage, the voters reserve the power to the legislature. And under Article 3, Section 1 of the Constitution, the legislature is ready to authorize marriage between same-sex couples today. I would like to recognize and thank Senator Avery Chumley and Senator Matt Matsunaga for their foresight and ingenious constitutional amendment they proposed back in 1997. It is because of them that we are able to vote today to allow same-sex marriage in Hawaii. I also want to thank our current Judiciary Chair for his steadfast commitment for equal rights and an excellent job in steering this bill forward. And I'd like to close my remarks on a personal note. Not only is my marriage not threatened by same-sex marriages, my wife and I believe that our own marriage is enriched by allowing all loving couples to marry. By passage of this bill, my wife and I will no longer be part of a privileged group allowed to marry. May our gay and lesbian friends enjoy all the rights and privileges and the joy in being officially recognized in legal marriages. Thank you, Madam President.
Further discussion, members? If not, Senator Chan Oakland.
Good afternoon, Madam President.
Good afternoon.
I stand in support of SB1 HD1.
Please proceed.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to thank members of the public for the phone calls, letters, visits, the one-on-one discussions I have had with many people throughout the community. and for the over 8,000 emails I have received in support of and in opposition to same-gender marriage. The sincerity in which people communicated with me is truly appreciated. I want people to know that I am grateful to them for taking the time to be involved in our legislative process, and for the contribution each person has made to provide the broadest possible views on this issue before we make our final decision. I am thankful to you, Madam President, Vice President Kouchi, Speaker, Vice Speaker, House and Senate leadership teams, the Senate and House Judiciary Chairs and Vice Chairs, the House Finance Chair and Vice Chair and their respective committee members, all of my Senate colleagues and House colleagues, and your staffs, as well as mine, our Senate and House clerks, Sergeant-at-Arms and their staff, the majority and minority research staff, other House and Senate support staff, the state sheriffs, the governor and other executive branch members, and many former legislative staff and volunteers for their time, professionalism, and dedication to the people of Hawaii. As some of you may know, my ancestors and my husband's ancestors came to Hawaii 7 generations ago. In the 1800s, my mother's relatives came to the islands as Christian missionaries to help and support many who worked here. Since that time, my and my husband's family members have contributed to our state as doctors, nurses, teachers, social workers, business owners, architects, engineers, artists, athletes, military and law enforcement officers, faith leaders, good parents, friends, and neighbors to others, and much more. I believe everyone here today, and those not able to join us at the Capitol, have rich histories and have made and continue to make wonderful contributions to our state. My hope is that the passion each of you have for this subject area will strengthen us as a community rather than divide us, and that mutual respect and love we have for one another will prevail. I hope that we honor each other's differences and celebrate the life that we have together in Hawaii, irrespective of the diverse views we hold on this subject. Life is too precious not to care for one another with compassion and respect. I grew up in a household where Christian and Buddhist practices and faith existed harmoniously. I am very blessed to have been raised in such a home and in an environment where there is deep and abiding respect and love for one another. In my 23 years of service as an elected official in the state legislature, 20 of those years has provided me so many learning opportunities around the same-gender marriage issue. In 1993, I had no background in this issue, but I was able to meet and discuss with people in long-standing, committed, same-gendered relationships, as well as attended every single hearing on the neighbor islands and Oahu on this topic with then Judiciary Chair Terrence Tom, and hearing from thousands of people statewide, truly providing a rare opportunity for me to develop a much deeper understanding of the complexities and challenges people in same-gender relationships have had to endure for so many years. I have learned from others the injustices they have had to face. Many things I and many of us take for granted as basic human rights and a part of a civil society. The bill before us provides this opportunity for people of our state to nurture a more compassionate and just society. The legislation before us embodies and expresses the deeply held value of our people to support loving and committed relationships and families. It also honors and protects the diverse religious beliefs of the people of Hawaii and the freedom of religion guaranteed under our state and federal constitutions. It preserves the public accommodation laws that protects people from discrimination. This measure will enable same-gendered married couples to enjoy the rights, privileges, and responsibilities of married couples of opposite gender. Finally, Madam President, it symbolizes the faith we have in humankind and the love we have for one another. Thank you so much for allowing me this time and for speaking from my heart. Thank you.
Senator Baker.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in strong support of equal rights and Senate Bill 1, House Draft 1.
Please proceed.
Thank you. I guess I'm surprised at all of the fear and almost hatred I hear from people who seem to be afraid of allowing others in committed relationships to be recognized under the law. I always considered myself to be a Christian. I go to church on Sunday, play the organ, and I keep asking myself, why are people so afraid of somebody else that's different, that may practice their religion in a different way? Why are people so afraid of folks that they don't understand or know? And I look back at what the Bible says Jesus preached when he was on the earth. And it really is about loving one another, having compassionate, reaching out to people that may be outcast and different and raising them up. And yet that's not what I hear from some of the folks that are opposed to Senate Bill 1, House Draft 1, and it troubles me. I guess I would want to ask them, in this day and age, what would Jesus do? I appreciate the majority policy leader taking us back to 1997 and laying the groundwork for why it is that we have the authority and the capability to make this change today. See, I don't see that providing equal treatment under the law is a bad thing, a negative thing, or is going to stop traditional marriage. I see it as augmenting marriage and actually including more people in more stable relationships. We have a significant divorce rate, not the lowest, not the highest among the states, but I don't see same-sex marriage as the enemy of traditional marriage and creating more divorces. I see things like domestic violence, financial worries, drugs, alcohol, inability to communicate as the enemy of any kind of marriage, traditional or same gender. It seems to me that justice delayed is justice denied, and it also seems to me that in Hawaii, with our tradition of aloha and love for all, that there really is no room for hate in the 808. I've been looking through some of the email that we've received, and I want to close with these words from a gentleman, I'm assuming, that wrote all of us senators today. And to me, it sums up one of the reasons, or the basis for the reason for my support for Senate Bill 1, House Draft 1. The author writes, I look forward to the day when our children can grow up in a society of wholehearted acceptance. I'm an adult, and my scars have hardened. And whatever happens today, I am hopeful it will be the beginning of a new era of equality, unlike the experience that I've had for several decades and lifetimes for those before me. With the continued support for Senate Bill 1, the children will not have to wear the scars we have for being who we are and loving who they love. May they live out their lives, their highest aspirations freely without fear of loss of life, dignity, and liberties promised by our Constitution. May it be so for this generation and all future generations. Mahalo, Madam President.
Further discussion, members. A roll call, Senator Sloan.
Yes, Madam President, just a very brief response, clarification. Since the Attorney General has been brought up several times today, I just want to reiterate, and for those people that don't know, the appointed Attorney General is not the attorney for the people. He is the attorney for the governor. He is appointed by the governor. And Judge Sakamoto last week, in reviewing the request for the TRO, which he denied, but which he kept the case open, said to those present that the opinions of the Attorney General of Hawaii given in this issue will not be controlling and will not be precedent. Thank you and aloha.
A roll call vote has been called, members.
Madam President.
Senator English.
Very briefly, I rise in support of the
Please
measure.
proceed.
Members, today, I'll be very, very brief. Today, we are taking a very important vote of conscience. I want to say thank you to Senator Chumbley and Senator Matsunaga, who many years ago had the foresight to preserve this issue for us to vote on today. From a Hawaiian perspective, this is nothing more than the expansion of aloha in Hawaii. And from a Hawaiian perspective, marriage has always been something that we recognized when people loved each other and chose to live with each other. It has taken a while for us to catch up with that notion, but today we stand at the brink of voting on that, to expand civil rights for all people in Hawaii. I thank you for your positive vote today as we move forward to make Hawaii truly the Aloha State. Mahalo.
Senator Thielen.
Thank you, Madam President. I also will be brief. I rise in support of Senate Bill 1, House
Please
Draft 1.
proceed.
I guess I was disturbed by some of the things that the senator from Hawaii, Kai, said earlier, and I want to address my remarks to the people sitting in the gallery behind me, the people who came down here day after day with signs saying that they supported traditional marriage. The senator from Hawaii, Kai, said that we don't understand people whose religious beliefs oppose same-sex marriage, that we call them stupid and we call them wrong. Speaking only for myself, I want to say he's partly right and partly wrong. He's partly right in that I don't understand it. But he's wrong in that I would never call them stupid or wrong, and I've never heard any of the other senators on this floor call them stupid or wrong. I accept that that is their religious belief. I accept that it is your First Amendment right to believe that. And I accept the protections in this bill that have eroded our long-standing public accommodations law to allow you to continue in your religious beliefs in that manner. The reason I'm voting to support this bill, I'm going to make a brief quote. We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution. The heart of the question is whether all Americans are to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities, whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be treated. This is what John F. Kennedy said in his 1961 Civil Rights Address. I want to thank the Reverend Heidel for opening today with a quote from President Lincoln in his second inaugural address, because that reminds us that our country has been through far more cataclysmic social change that has turned tradition on its head, and we've made it through together to become a stronger nation. And I want to ask the people sitting behind me to understand, even though you may not understand the reason for my vote and for some of the other senators' votes, to accept it, that it's with malice towards none. We need to work together to bind the wounds that have come up in this contentious debate. We need to accept each other's differences in our beliefs and to come together now to move forward. Our vote today is not the end of the discussion. Our state is going to continue the discussion on same-sex marriage for a long time, but hopefully we can do so in a respectful manner. Thank you, Madam President.
A roll call vote. Senator Kouchi.
I rise in opposition, Madam
Please
President.
proceed.
We need to state why we're standing and how we're voting on the bill, but really, the first 2 days of the special session, I had the opportunity to serve as the presiding officer, and I feel I'd be remiss if I didn't stand and publicly say, like the Judiciary Chair, what an outstanding job was done by our staff, the Sheriff's Department, and all of the senators and the employees, and in what were certainly 2 trying days filled with a lot of emotion. I truly appreciate the support that I had and the people who worked together to make the process run smoothly in the Senate. I know where the votes are, and in the democracy, we're given the opportunity to express ourselves, but at the end of the day, the majority carries the day, and we need to go forward. And much has been said about how do we come back together after such a divisive issue. And I want to leave my colleagues with one of the memories that I'm going to be taking from these 15 days. And this is in particular directed to the friends of the majority leader. Halloween night, I sat in my office by myself and heard all of the noise out front and decided to go down, and in what would have been the shadow of Father Damien's statue, stood by myself. And on one side, the traditional marriage people were sign waving with great joy and emotion. And on the other side, the equality marriage group with the same kind of passion was sign waving. And then from the tent of traditional marriage, where they had a loudspeaker and a system, Hawaii 78 came out, and Brother Is and his haunting lyrics. And both sides, ironically, embraced the lyrics as if they were the motto of each of their causes. And I stood there by myself, amazed at what the power of song and music can do. And if we can agree that we love Brother Is, and if we can agree that we all love our children, and if we can agree that we all love Hawaii, after today, we need to agree to find where those common areas are. If you listen to my colleague from Hawaii Kai, there will be other amendments to be considered. There will be things that we need to look at about how whatever laws we have work best for everyone in Hawaii. And what makes the democracy great is that we do change by peaceful vote. And then we go forward and we show ourselves as an example to the world about how the democracy works and how people can do it peacefully. And I hope as we go forward, we can all find that place. Thank you, Madam President.
Vice President Kouchi, the chair thanks you for presiding for the first 2 days of special session. Good job, Senator.
Madam President,
Majority Leader.
call for the vote.
A roll call vote has been called for. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Senator Baker? Aye. Senator Chun Oakland?
Aye.
Senator Dela Cruz?
Excused.
Senator English?
Aye.
Senator Espero?
Yes.
Senator Gabbard?
No.
Senator Galutaria?
Aye.
Senator Green?
Aye.
Senator He? Yes. Senator Ige?
Aye.
Senator Ihara?
Aye.
Senator Kahele?
Aye.
Senator Keith Agaran? Senator Kidani?
Aye.
Senator Kochi? Senator Nishihara?
Aye.
Senator Ruderman?
Yes.
Senator Shimabukuro?
Aye.
Senator Sloan?
No.
Senator Solomon?
Yes.
Senator Taniguchi?
Excused.
Senator Thielen? Senator Tokuda?
Aye.
Senator Wakai? Madam President,
No.
19 ayes, 4 noes, and 2 excused.
Senate Bill 1, House Draft 1 passes final reading. Madam Clerk. May I remind the audience to please refrain yourselves, otherwise we're going to clear the gallery. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Madam President, moving to page 2, miscellaneous business, usual and customary resolutions. Senate Resolution 2, authorizing the President to approve the Journal of the Senate on this final day of the Senate second special session of 2013. And Senate Resolution 3, informing the House and the Governor that the Senate is ready to adjourn sine die for adoption.
Senator Sparrow.
I move for the adoption of Senate resolutions numbers 1 and 2, 2 and 3,
1, 2, and 3.
2 and 3.
Senator Sloan.
I second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. All opposed, no. The motion is carried. Senate Resolution number 2 and 3 are adopted. Madam Clerk.
No further business, Madam President.
Members, Chair has announcements. Members, in light of the devastation in the Philippines, I am proposing that the Senate conduct a drive to send support to the people affected in the Philippines. And I hope we will be unanimous in this voluntary effort. And I would also like to ask that the Senate adjourn today on a rising vote and observe a moment of silence to honor the people of the Philippines who lost loved ones, their homes, and livelihoods, and are now working to recover from the devastation of Typhoon Haiyan. In our own way, I hope each of us will offer our comfort to them in their time of need. Senator Sparrow.
I move that the Senate of the 27th Legislature, second special session of 2013, adjourn sine die on a rising vote, observing a moment of silence to honor the people of the Philippines in the wake of Typhoon Haiyan.
Senator Sloan.
God bless the people of the Philippines and give them strength. I second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. If there are no objections from the members, the Senate of the 27th Legislature, second special session of 2013, adjourns sine die on a rising vote, observing a moment of silence to honor the people of the Philippines during this difficult time. Will the audience please also rise?